We're going to go live right now to Ottawa, where Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem is discussing today's rate decision.
But we said our discussions were shifting focus. The question was no longer so much whether the policy rate was restrictive enough to restore price stability. It was more a question of how long to keep it at its current level. Today's decision was taken because the Governing Council believes that a policy rate of 5% is still appropriate. It is still too early to think about lowering it. According to recent data, monetary policy is essentially working as expected, but inflation is expected to rise gradually and unevenly, and there are still upside risks. The Governing Council wants to see core inflation continue to fall on a sustainable basis.
Before taking your questions, let me take a moment to discuss how the economy is evolving. Global growth has slowed and inflationary pressures have continued to ease. The U.S. economy also slowed but has remained surprisingly strong even as inflation has continued to decline. In Canada, economic growth has come in somewhat stronger than projected in the January MPR, but the pace remains weak and below potential. Growth in the second half of 2023 was close to zero, allowing supply to catch up with demand. Labor markets have continued to ease gradually. With employment growing more slowly than population, the labor market has come into better balance. Job vacancies have returned to more normal levels, and the pace of hiring has been modest. Wage growth has been in the 4 to 5% range for some time now, but there are now signs that wage pressures may be easing. CPI inflation eased to 2.9% in January. This largely reflected lower energy prices and easing in food price inflation, as well as weakness in semi-durable prices like footwear and clothing. But shelter price inflation remains elevated and is still the biggest contributor to overall inflation. More broadly, underlying price pressures persist. Our preferred measures of core inflation eased in January, but remain above 3% on a year-over-year and a 3-month basis. As well, the share of CPI components rising faster than 3% declined, but is still above the historical average. Looking ahead, we continue to expect inflation to be close to 3% through the middle of this year before easing in the second half. Gasoline prices are expected to continue to add volatility to inflation in coming months, and shelter price pressures are likely to persist. In other words, the path back to the 2% target will be slow, and progress is likely to be uneven. Governing Council also discussed the risks to the economy and inflation. Risks to global energy prices and transportation costs related to conflicts remain elevated. Domestically, inflation could prove more persistent than expected. We don't want to keep monetary policy this restrictive for longer than we have to, but nor do we want to jeopardize the progress we've made in bringing inflation down. Governing Council remains concerned about the persistence of underlying inflation, and we want to see further deceleration in core inflation in the coming months. We remain focused on the indicators of inflationary pressures that we've mentioned before. Demand pressures have eased, and the economy now looks to be in modest excess supply. With the labor market coming into better balance, we are looking for further evidence that wage growth is moderating. Before our April decision, we'll also get new information on corporate pricing behavior and inflation expectations. We'll be looking for the frequency and size of price increases to continue to normalize, and for short-term inflation expectations to ease further. We've come a long way in our fight against inflation. Monetary policy is working, inflation is coming down. But it's too early to loosen the restrictive stance of policy that has gotten us this far. Low, stable inflation is a cornerstone of shared prosperity, and we remain resolute in our commitment to restore price stability. And with that summary, Senior Deputy Governor and I would be pleased to take your questions.
Okay, thank you, Governor. Let me quickly remind everyone of the procedures here. We've got close to a dozen reporters here in Ottawa at the bank, as well as a few on the line. I'm going to start here in the room. We'll ask everyone to please limit yourself to one question to make sure we can get to every outlet. If I forget to do so, please state your name and affiliation. Avant de poser une question, veuillez vous identifier. Et si je ne l'ai pas fait, et comme d'habitude, libre de poser vos questions dans la langue.
You may ask your question in the official language of your choice.
Here in Ottawa, and I'm going to call on Mackenzie Gray of Global News. Please go ahead.
I didn't think I was going to go first, so I'm going to go a little off topic here relative to what I think my colleagues will be asking. But both in the States, Janet Yellen and Jay Powell have both talked about commercial real estate being a potential issue. Jay Powell said it's a manageable problem, but he's worried about some banks having issues there. In the Canadian context, how concerned are you about that being an issue for the economy going forward?
We work with our other federal partners that monitor the financial conditions in Canada, so OSFI in particular. So we've definitely got our eye on commercial real estate. The market in Canada is not the same as in the U.S. A lot of the commercial real estate is held by sort of mid-tier banks. In Canada, the exposure to commercial real estate spread more broadly. We also haven't seen some of the sort of reset in valuations that we've seen. So it's definitely something we're watching closely. We've got our financial stability report coming out in early May, and we've started to work on that now. And this is definitely an area we're taking a deep look into, so you can expect to hear more from us.
Okay, let's stay down here with Najud Al-Maliz of Canadian Press, please.
Hi, Governor. I'm wondering how much shelter price inflation is playing a role in your decision to continue holding your policy rate.
Najud, look, housing's a big part of the economy. It's certainly something that Canadians are very focused on. And so, yes, shelter price inflation, it's the biggest contributor to inflation right now. It's certainly weighing on our decisions. Having said that, our target is for total CPI inflation. And if you look beyond shelter, we are seeing that underlying inflationary pressures persist. And one way to look at that is if you look at our measures, our preferred measures of core, CPI trim, CPI median, those exclude the things that are going up the most and the things that are going down the most. So most of the shelter components are in the things that are going up the most.